They turn their emotions way down, not completely off, of course, and they do have empathy and they can empathize. They don't have displayed empathy much, certainly not to the degree that you want, but of course they have empathy. They're not an automaton or a robot. And the reason that they turn their emotions way down is because, honestly, since they're almost overly logical and very task-oriented, tasks of a non-social emotional nature, they purposely turn their emotions way down for two reasons. And I am speaking in generalizations. This is not a one size fits everybody, but this is a good 80% of the time, this is what goes on. Turn the emotions way down because they don't say this, they don't even know they necessarily think this way, but it comes from many years of emotions getting in the way of their logical thinking and their task orientation. It's not that they have no room for emotions. Honestly, they just don't see any need for emotions in their mind. They might say, if they were honest with themselves, emotions just get in the way of completing tasks, and their motto might even be remove emotions and accomplish the task more efficiently. And that goes very much against the grain of, in this case, the NT female brain. So that's one of the things that goes on with respect to turning the emotions way down, is it gets in the way of their logic and of completing non-social emotional tasks. The other reason they've turned their emotions way down is because in many cases, it'd be interesting for you to ask your husband about this later today. A lot of times they knew something was off. Maybe they were labeled a problem child by parents, maybe a problem student by teachers, tried to fit in with peers. Oftentimes were ostracized, rejected, bullied, teased. And they came to the conclusion at some point at a very young age that they just can't do the social game. They're no good at it. And so they have kind of gravitated towards a special interest that has nothing to do with people. So that's another reason that they have kind of shut their emotions off. They've learned to kind of be a solo player. And I probably should mention a third one, although this is definitely the minority of cases. Some of the time, in this case, the little boy with autism was actually an empath, believe it or not. And this is the minority of cases, but there are some cases where he was an empath, but he also had high anxiety, and it was too anxiety producing for him to feel other people's feelings. It was too hard for him emotionally. Somebody who already had anxiety, it was too painful to feel other people's pain. And so he learned, probably at an unconscious level, to stop feeling because it was just too painful to feel other people's pain. I call this the paramedic effect. You can't be a good paramedic and be an empath, dealing with blood, gore, dead babies, Lord only knows what throughout the day. You can't be an empath and be a good soldier in times of war. And honestly, with autism and all the traits that we talked about last week, mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, and so on, it's hard to go through life as an autistic individual and also be an empath. So they're kind of incompatible. This is not going to be much consolation for her to hear what I'm getting ready to tell you, but it is the truth. But in the early going, they want to accuse you of masking. Oh, it was all a fake job. You were a great con man. It was all pretend. No.
I heard that.
Oh, no, it was not pretend. He was not faking it. She was his special interest, maybe not the number one special interest. She was way up there in the top one or two of his special interest at that time. Everything that he said or did, all the affection, sex, compassion, grace, mercy, etc., emotional reciprocity, give and take in conversation, all of it was very authentic. Once the romantic phase ends and the settling in phase begins, where we're just back to the mundane, routine, day-to-day living again, and I still love her, I still value the marriage, but the romance phase is over. That's when he kind of, her being his special interest, it kind of declines. And now he spends more of his time with his true special interest. Also, the relationship gets more complicated. In the early going of the relationship, like I mentioned to you at the top of the call, this lady that, well, when we were first dating, we'd go over there and get ice cream. In the early going, it's all fun and games and play. Once you get married and have kids and now have to work and pay the bills, it gets real complicated. And if you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some mind blindness and emotions blindness, and it's going to be hard to fire on all 8 cylinders if you don't have 8 cylinders. She's firing on 8. She's very intuitive. Her social and emotional intelligence is way up here. Her social and emotional skills and needs are also way up here. His are not. He does not have the same degree of emotional and social skills and needs as she does. And so that's a turnoff to her. And she thinks, well, you've kind of abandoned me. That's her download. You have abandoned me. You are emotionally unavailable. It's like living with a hologram. Well, that's very insulting. And that, by the way, that's her download. So your love hasn't diminished. Your respect for her as a person has not diminished. Your valuing the marriage has not diminished. What has diminished is your interest level in having high levels of emotional reciprocity and connection and give and take in conversation, and even sometimes sex kind of wanes after the years. So she takes, because he's doing these things that create distance, that's her download. You're not creating distance, she's perceiving distance. Because I'm downloading these behaviors in him as creating distance, therefore he doesn't love me, therefore I'm not important to him, therefore he doesn't really care about me, doesn't value the marriage, the work is more important to him than me. And these are all her downloads. But that's secondarily your problem too, because now she's going to accuse you of being insensitive, uncaring, selfish, narcissistic, sociopathic. So that's the answer, that's the truth. And as I mentioned before, I even went into that monologue, that's really not going to help her much, because she's still going to think, okay, well, I understand cognitively what's going on there, but it doesn't help me emotionally. Well, you want me to lie? You want me to concoct some kind of sugar-coated thing to make you feel better? Or do you want the truth? I can either lie and make up some bullshit to make you feel better, or I can do the better option and just be totally honest with you about what's going on. And doing this for a number of years, that's usually what goes on with him. And I want to emphasize again, his love for her hasn't decreased. His respect for her hasn't decreased. His valuing the marriage hasn't decreased. One thing that has increased is her pushing for that original connection, which you distance even more from that. Her message raises your anxiety, and as an anxiety reduction strategy, you kind of pull away. She pursues, you pull away. She pursues, you pull away. And then she views this as abandonment. And then if this goes on for too long, she stops pursuing. And then worst case scenario, the two of you do become just roommates at that point and don't even try to work on anything anymore. But hopefully you'll intervene earlier down the road, and you're here, and you can let her listen to what I just said. Mm-hmm. He knows that he sucks at social skills because he probably learned that as a child. And so if you were a little kid and your parents signed you up for Little League or T-ball or whatever, and you just didn't have the knack for that, and you got benched, you just basically sucked. So you ended up kind of being the bat boy, and it was a terrible experience. I'm never playing baseball again. I suck at that. I was never any good at it. They started me way out in the outfield, and then the coach wasn't even happy with me way out there, and he just benched me, and I just sat on the bench the entire season. So now that I have been benched by the coach, and I know that I'm not a good baseball player, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, well, would you like to join this team and learn how to play baseball? It's like, no, I've already been around that block. I suck at it. No, I don't have any interest in learning baseball or learning how to be a better pitcher or a better batter. and I'm perfectly fine not playing baseball. And so that's exactly what's going on with your husband, is that he knows he's terrible at it. He's had a bad experience with it, and talking is a social activity. Of course he doesn't want to talk. And it's a shame that he feels that way, because social skills can be taught, and the give and take in conversation can be taught. And he would actually get to the point where he probably enjoy conversing and enjoy talking, because he's actually doing it fairly adeptly for the first time in his life. So he might even find some joy in having conversation about something other than his topic of interest.
I get a lot of NT wives that say, well, when we first started dating, my yet-to-be husband just did a lot of masking and presented himself as someone other than who he really was. And it was kind of deceitful. But I can promise you that your now ASD husband never had the thought of, well, I really like this girl, I want to date her, and I'm going to be deceitful and present myself as being somebody else. And then when I get comfortable with her and have her trapped, I'll just go back to my old way of behaving. Masking is not manipulation. Rather, it is a cover-up for shame, specifically a cover-up for toxic shame and toxic guilt. Healthy guilt is, I did something wrong. I didn't necessarily mean to do it, but now in retrospect, I see it was hurtful. I want to learn from this mistake. I intend not to repeat this mistake. I'm going to make amends and move forward. Toxic guilt, though, is I'm always making these social mistakes. I'm always hurting her. I'm always letting her down. I never seem to get it right. Doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. This in turn leads to toxic shame, which is because I'm always making these mistakes repeatedly and can never seem to learn from my mistakes. Therefore, I am a mistake. And so his social awkwardness becomes an identity. And he's embarrassed by that. And he purposely tries to hide that out of a sense of shame. In other words, he's thinking, if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me, I wouldn't be lovable, I wouldn't be acceptable, I would live the rest of my life alone. In other words, I can't really let my true colors show, because if I do, I will be rejected, ostracized, maybe even teased and bullied. I will never measure up. I'll never have what it takes to make it in the social world. So this so-called masking is a shame cover-up, not a manipulation, although I admit that from the NT female brain perspective, it certainly seems as if it's a manipulation. And he's a con man of sorts. And the reason that he changes his colors once the relationship has some mileage on it is because he's comfortable now with his NT partner. He lets down his guard because he feels that finally it's okay just to be myself. But unfortunately, after years of being chastised and reprimanded, which is how he would view it, he realizes yet again, I can't really truly relax and just be me. So this defensiveness that you see in him and these neutral comments or constructive criticisms that he downloads as an attack are the direct result of toxic shame. Feelings of not being good enough, yet again being reprimanded, looked down on, and told in no uncertain terms that he's not good enough. So what I do instead, I disconnect from people because they rarely accept me, and I connect with my special interest because it always accepts me.
I'm a big believer in facing the truth. I would rather be hurt by the truth than blinded by bullshit. I've always been that way. And I had an NT wife email me today. Well, you could use neurodiverse instead of autism spectrum disorder, because, these guys are sensitive, and I think that my husband is real sensitive, and he doesn't want to, admit that he might have this disorder. And so you've heard of this term, right? Neurodiverse, and it's a politically correct term, and it would, be a little more sensitive. So duly noted, but I don't think you guys are that fragile that I have to be. I'm not really into being politically correct. Plus, I use neurodiversity to describe the couples. When when I say neurodiverse couples, I mean one has autism, one does not. So the reason I'm not willing to use neurodiverse for you guys is because there's no shame involved. To use neurodiverse to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit implies that there's something to be ashamed of. No. Period. ASD level 1 is what we're referring to now. There's 2 other levels. It has to do with levels of functioning. You're already aware of that. You guys are all ASD level 1, which is high functioning. So think of ASD level 1 as simply I don't like the term disorder, though, I will tell you that. Because there again, that sounds like there's something wrong or bad or to be ashamed of. So I do not like the term disorder. So I guess I do want to be politically correct on that. I prefer to call it a condition or a different way of thinking because I think that's more in alignment with the reality of things. And you could think of it as a condition of social skills being low, social needs being low, logic being high. And that's kind of your saving grace. That is your strength, your logic. We wouldn't have this computer we're talking on right now if we didn't have somebody on the autism spectrum, Asperger's syndrome, and back in that day, Bill Gates. The engineering field is full of people on the spectrum. Computer sciences, they're all over the place. It's almost a stretch to call you guys in the minority because there's so many undiagnosed people crawling around all over the planet. If we could get to the bottom of things, we might find that 30% or 40% of people, the entire people on the planet, are on the spectrum. That sounds like a bizarre exaggeration. It's not, because there's a lot of people that have these traits, but nobody has put 2 and 2 together yet or done some research and thought, hey, maybe you have this thing called ASD level 1. They just go on with life and they don't even entertain the idea. So there's more people that have it than have been diagnosed with it or that even have talked about it. She's wanting to connect with you and you're more wanting to connect with your special interest, we will say. So in the early going of the relationship, it's very possible that she was your special interest. That happens in many cases. And so she got the indication in the early going of the relationship, hey, he seems like a nice guy. I get empathy. I get emotional reciprocity. I get intimacy. I get sex. He seems like a good guy. And then when the newness of that relationship kind of wears off, typically he will gravitate back towards his original special interest, especially when the relationship gets messy. And I use terms a lot that I hear from the guys. And that term gets used a lot, messy. When we were dating, things were fun. We just went out to eat. We went out to drink. Whatever, it was fun and games, and it was okay. But then I had to meet her parents. Then when we got married, then we had kids, and I have financial responsibility. And so as the relationship grew, which it's supposed to grow, of course, it got complicated. And the social and emotional aspects became replete. And at some level, you maybe kind of got over your head because when you kind of disconnected, she noticed that, and her being a team player and being very social, she tried to get you to come back into the intimacy that you may have had in the early going of the relationship, but her message sucked. Her complaining and anger, her heart was in the right spot. She was doing the best that she knew how to do at the time. But her method of trying to pull you back in and get that intimacy and emotional reciprocity back raised your anxiety. So instead of getting you back in connected, your tendency was to pull away. So she kind of got the opposite of what she wanted. If you want to turn your troubled neurodiverse marriage around, you will have to do the following. You will have to do the following. Both parties will have to learn more about each other's strengths and weaknesses. They will have to avoid judging or blaming each other. They will have to find a new balance of separateness and togetherness
independence and intimacy. They will have to translate their complaints into requests for change. They will have to learn to identify and talk about their fears instead of acting them out, and they will have to see each other in a new light. In other words, we are both gifted and challenged.
We have to make a huge paradigm shift. This is going to be hard to do for you and others. I mean, I'm really going out on a limb here and asking a lot of you. But in the spirit of happy wife, happy life. Some of you are probably sick of that cliche, but it is so true. Because when she's all pissed off, unless you're just gone at work or you've taken off and shut down somewhere, it's like a dark cloud hanging over. It's worse than a dark cloud hanging over your head. It's a dark cloud that's raining on you and striking you in the ass with lightning. So in the spirit of keeping the peace, we have to make this shift from I'm going to listen to mount a defense because I know I'm right and she's wrong, over to I'm going to listen to understand her perspective. And this is going to take practice, and you're going to flub it up, and you don't beat up on yourself when you flub it up. You just go, okay, well, I got all passionate again, and I know I'm right, and her opinion is just basically dumb. I can't even believe she believes that. But now I got to go back to the blackboard and try again. And that's fine. There's going to be a lot of trying again, a lot of fail, try, fail, try, fail. That's the way it's supposed to go. That's the way it will go. You practice. Here it is again. Now, I'm not talking about every conversation, the weather, sports, the stuff that you're really adamant about. There needs to be a little trigger goes off in your head. Okay, this is a hot topic for me, and this is where I usually go nuclear and insist that my way is the only way. So what I'm going to do instead, to reduce my relationship stress, I'm not even doing this for her, is I'm going to listen instead of thinking about what I'm getting ready to say so I can mount a very factual, smart defense. I'm going to now listen to understand. I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to look in her direction. I'm going to nod while she's talking. I'm going to tactfully stop her periodically before she goes on too long, because I want to paraphrase back what she said. And if she gets on to point 2 and 3 in her message delivery, I may forget what point 1 was. So when she gets on to point number 2 or 3, I'm going to say, would you mind if I check and make sure I got it so far? So what I understand you're saying is blah, 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 blah. And you're going to paraphrase, not parrot back. You're going to paraphrase back. She might say, no, that's not what I mean. You can say, well, would you mind trying again with slightly different wordage? She'll try it again. You'll get it the first or second time out. You'll say, so what you're saying is blah, blah, blah. She's going to say, yes, that's what I mean. That proves understanding. If you can paraphrase back what she said and she goes, yes, that's what I mean, that by default proves understanding. If you're more interested in keeping the peace than making a point, then while she's talking, have the thought, I'm listening to understand, and I'm going to paraphrase this back here in a minute. Versus, I'm listening, but not really. I'm thinking about how I'm going to come back and mount a defense. You have to make that shift.
I got a special message to the NT wives today, and that is, if you will give up the fight, your autistic spouse will give up the defense. How long have you fought? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? What is the fight? You trying to get him to understand. Understand your needs, understand your wants, understand your feelings, understand your perspectives. You have tried and tried and tried until you've tied your brain into a pretzel knot and you're getting nowhere. That's the fight. It's exhausted you. In many cases, the NT wives that I work with are mentally ill and getting physically ill. They've fought themselves to death. Give up the fight. And I really want to impart this word of encouragement. If you will get into acceptance that some of these traits in your autistic husband are not changeable, and they're not going anywhere. They will outlive you. Autistic traits will outlive you. You will lose this battle. If you can get into acceptance, and I know it's hard to do, God knows it's hard to do. When you get to acceptance, you will have relief. You will have relief. You will be at peace again. You'll be able to rest again. You'll rest your mind. You'll be able to rest your body. And you will have the thought, I wish I had moved in the direction of acceptance a long time ago. How many years have I wasted? How many brain cells have I burned up? So you give up the fight, and he will give up the defense. And now it's a win-win, because you're not wasting your valuable time and energy, and his anxiety will come down because some of the pressure is off. So you will get an extra boost of relief in that regard. I promise you, getting to acceptance is tough work. Most of you won't get there because you're not going to try, because you don't see the value in it. And you're still holding on to that old paradigm that someday he'll get it. Someday he'll do better. Someday he'll try harder. Someday we'll be happy again. No, that's just you fighting again. Wave the white flag, give up, quit. Stop trying so hard. Stop caring so much. I'm not saying stop loving him or kick him to the curb. You will find relief in acceptance, and it is possible to get there. And when you do, you're going to feel so much better inside and out, and you're going to have the thought, man, I wish I had done this a long time ago. I can finally now be at peace and rest and feel as though I have some sanity back and have myself back. Many of you NT wives have lost a piece of yourself. You forgot who you were. You get to acceptance and you'll find that lady again, I promise. So one common question that comes up from neurotypical spouses is, why does my autistic spouse prefer tasks over socializing? Well, to answer this question, we first need to look at the concept of weak predictive ability. If one has the ability to predict, he or she can come up with an educated guess about what may happen in the near or distant future. That is, some outcome is expected. But this ability is not necessarily based on experience or knowledge. Prediction is a skill that allows us to generalize. In other words, since the occurrence of situation A resulted in outcome B, then a situation similar to A will likely result in an outcome similar to B. Prediction not only affords quicker and more accurate reaction, but also a more efficient neural coding. Now, people on the autism spectrum have poor predictive abilities. In other words, they have great difficulty predicting future events. Another function of prediction is to fill in missing information. For example, if the driver in front of you veers his car sharply to the left and then to the right, you might predict that he swerved in order to avoid hitting something in the road. The autistic person's impaired predictive ability means impaired filling in of missing information for perception and action. So what does weak predictive ability have to do with a preference for tasks versus preferring to be with people and socializing? Well, since people on the autism spectrum have to live every day with the uncertainty inflicted by their poor predictive skills, they tend to favor relatively predictable and precise events and tasks. So as a result, they prefer dealing with facts, figures, objects, and so on, which are more predictable, instead of with people, which are less predictable. And I think you would agree that people are very unpredictable. So research, engineering, computers, other things that involves facts, figures, and objects have a much greater appeal to individuals who don't like a lot of unpredictability in their life. Due to difficulties with generalizing skills, people on the autism spectrum have a lower tolerance for unpredictability and complexity. They argue that figures, facts, objects, and associated tasks are predictable and simple, whereas people are not. Hey, this is Mark, and in this video I want to talk about the first year of marriage in your neurodiverse relationship. What happens when the ASD mask comes off? So one of the most painful things I hear from spouses in a neurodiverse marriage is this: I didn't marry the person I'm living with now. And often what they're describing isn't deception, it's something called masking. So today we're going to talk about what really happens in the first year of marriage when the ASD mask comes off, what the early warning signs look like, and what both partners are feeling during this transition. Let's start with dating. During courtship, many autistic adults are highly motivated to connect, to be chosen, to be accepted. Masking during dating can look like high emotional attentiveness, frequent communication, social flexibility that feels effortless, and deep interest in your thoughts and feelings. And here's the key point. Listen, that's not manipulation. Masking is often a survival skill, especially for autistic adults who learned early in life that being themselves leads to rejection and ridicule. But masking is exhausting. Now, marriage changes everything. Once the relationship becomes permanent, shared home, shared finances, shared routines, the nervous system relaxes. And that's often when the mask begins to slip. Early signs the mask is coming off may include emotional withdrawal after the wedding, decreased verbal affection, less curiosity about your inner world, increased rigidity around routines, irritability or shutdowns at home, and statements like, I just want to be alone, or why are you so emotional, or I thought we already talked about this, or why do you have to keep bringing that up, and so on. Now, for the neurotypical partner, this often feels like emotional abandonment, especially if she has been emotionally abandoned as a child. Now let's talk about the emotional experience for both partners. For the neurotypical spouse, there's often shock, confusion, a deep sense of betrayal. Like, why didn't you show me this before? Or was the relationship in the early going actually real? So many neurotypical spouses blame themselves. I should have known better. Man, if I'd have known then what I know now. Or they just wonder if they were just naive. Now, for the ASD partner, what's happening internally is very different. He may feel relieved to stop performing. He may feel overwhelmed by constant closeness. He might be confused about emotional expectations, and he's going to be unaware that anything has changed. In his mind, the relationship feels safe now, so the effort drops. Now, let's talk about how to spot masking before your marriage. If you're dating or engaged, here are important questions to observe, not just ask. Watch for the following. Does your ASD partner or suspected ASD partner only function well during good times? Does he recover quickly from social interaction or crash afterward? Does he struggle with emotional repair after conflict? Is vulnerability in the relationship one-sided? And does he show curiosity about your emotional world without prompting? Masking often looks like competence, but lacks sustainability. Now let's talk about what helps during the first year. If you're already married and this is happening, here's what helps. Not fixes, but helps. Name the transition without blame. Learn the difference between intent versus impact. Adjust expectations on both sides. Focus on structure, predictability, and emotional safety, and seek neurodiversity-informed support, not traditional couples therapy. The goal here is not to force the mask back on, but to build a marriage that works without it. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, well, this explains everything, what the hell was I thinking when I hooked up with this guy? Okay, if those are your thoughts, hey, you're not broken and you're not alone. And you weren't dumb. And you weren't deceived or manipulated either. Having said that, neurodiverse marriages can work, but only when both partners understand what's actually happening beneath the surface. Now, in future videos, I'm going to talk about emotional loneliness after the mask drops, repairing trust, and rebuilding intimacy without forcing neurotypical standards. So stay tuned. I get a lot of NT wives that say, well, when we first started dating, my yet-to-be husband just did a lot of masking and presented himself as someone other than who he really was. And it was kind of deceitful. But I can promise you that your now ASD husband never had the thought of, well, I really like this girl, I want to date her, and I'm going to be deceitful and present myself as being somebody else. And then when I get comfortable with her and have her trapped, I'll just go back to my old way of behaving. Masking is not manipulation. Rather, it is a cover-up for shame, specifically a cover-up for toxic shame and toxic guilt. Healthy guilt is, I did something wrong. I didn't necessarily mean to do it, but now in retrospect, I see it was hurtful. I want to learn from this mistake. I intend not to repeat this mistake. I'm going to make amends and move forward. Toxic guilt, though, is I'm always making these social mistakes. I'm always hurting her. I'm always letting her down. I never seem to get it right. Doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. This in turn leads to toxic shame, which is because I'm always making these mistakes repeatedly and can never seem to learn from my mistakes. Therefore, I am a mistake. And so his social awkwardness becomes an identity. And he's embarrassed by that. And he purposely tries to hide that out of a sense of shame. In other words, he's thinking, if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me, I wouldn't be lovable, I wouldn't be acceptable, I would live the rest of my life alone. In other words, I can't really let my true colors show, because if I do, I will be rejected, ostracized, maybe even teased and bullied. I will never measure up. I'll never have what it takes to make it in the social world. So this so-called masking is a shame cover-up, not a manipulation, although I admit that from the NT female brain perspective, it certainly seems as if it's a manipulation. And he's a con man of sorts. And the reason that he changes his colors once the relationship has some mileage on it is because he's comfortable now with his NT partner. He lets down his guard because he feels that finally it's okay just to be myself. But unfortunately, after years of being chastised and reprimanded, which is how he would view it, he realizes yet again, I can't really truly relax and just be me. So this defensiveness that you see in him and these neutral comments or constructive criticisms that he downloads as an attack are the direct result of toxic shame. Feelings of not being good enough, yet again being reprimanded, looked down on, and told in no uncertain terms that he's not good enough. So what I do instead, I disconnect from people because they rarely accept me, and I connect with my special interest because it always accepts me.
Let me just go on record as saying this. First of all, there's some NTs that aren't so NT. Secondarily, they have their own version of mind blindness and executive function deficits and anxiety. And what's funny to me, one of the big complaints, number one spot on the list, I get no empathy from him. On further inspection, when I look at how she's treating him, you're doing the same thing. You got no empathy for him. So what makes you so self-righteous that you think you're the victim and he's not? You are very task-oriented, and you learn to be very self-sufficient and independent and autonomous at a very young age. One of the NT wives, her husband lost a family member, and she wanted to console him, and he didn't really appreciate that. And she was confused as to why. I'm trying to be there for him and show empathy and console him, and it's almost like it's a turnoff to him. And so I said to them the same thing I'm saying to you guys, because you're very autonomous and independent, you will process loss. In this case, we're talking about loss. You will process loss in your own way, on your own time, and you don't need moral support from her. In fact, the more she goes, well, how do you feel? Are you okay? And all this, it almost feels like interrogating. It's like, just, I will deal with my feelings, okay? I don't need your help on me dealing with my feelings. Hey, this is going to be a real startling thing to hear. I don't think you're doing anything wrong there. She's not going to want to hear that. By the way, you didn't trick anybody. You're not a magician. She's giving you way more credit for having skills up your sleeve than you have. Now, you did present differently in the early going of the relationship than you did later, for reasons that I just stated a little bit ago. Even neurotypical people do that. So what's up with, this is my assessment, is that when it comes to, business and formal relationships, you do a good job, and I'm not going to use the term masking. You do a good job of putting on your best face being on your best behavior.
Mhm.
But then when you're with your wife and close friends, this is why I say this part here is there's nothing wrong with this. When you have close friends and with your wife, you feel comfortable with them. You don't need to feel like I got to put on this front. So you finally relax and be yourself around them. So when they say, well, when I first met you, you were this way and now you're this other way, it's because the first time you met me, I was trying to put on a good front. And now that I'm kind of more relaxed and feel safe in this relationship, I'm just willing to be myself. I don't see anything wrong with either ends of that spectrum. It might create a problem for you because maybe when you let your true colors show, some people don't like those colors.
Sure.
Those are the people you can avoid. You're the same person now as you were then. So that's point number one. Point number two is when she says, well, you're only good for socializing for a limited amount of time, you're goddamn right. What's the big surprise? If he has low social and emotional intelligence, he's going to have low social and emotional skills, and he's going to have, he's going to have low social and emotional needs. He can go all year without talking about feelings, and he can meet your needs without knowing how you feel. And if you want to speak French about how you feel, and he's supposed to know what he's supposed to do based on how you feel, do yourself a favor, go beat your head against a brick wall, because it'll be a lot less painful and you'll get more accomplished. So just because he has a short social span of time and doesn't understand feelings, doesn't mean that he doesn't care about you, doesn't mean that he can't meet your needs. This sounds so simplistic, but if you do it, it actually helps. When you're in that moment and it comes out of nowhere of high anxiety, the tendency is for your breathing to get real shallow and for your muscles to tense. When anxiety strikes, your breathing will get shallow and your muscles somewhere, I don't know where you feel your tension. I feel it in my neck. That seems to be the first go-to for my body. And you'll probably, if you do a little self-research, you'll be able to find out where it goes to. Some people's the lower back, some people's headache. In that moment, okay, I'm really anxious right now. What's my first line of defense? I'm going to breathe, not in a way that's obvious and that people think, what the hell is he doing? I'm going to focus on breathing. And my breathing is not going to be just any old kind of breath. It's going to be, I'm going to physically pay attention to a 3-second in-breath and about a 5-second exhale. You don't have to use your mouth like that. So it's 3 in. You can use different combinations as long as the exhale is longer than the inhale. So we'll go 3 inhale, 5-second exhale. And if you can combine that with, once you've identified where your muscle tension might be, if there is any at all, okay, I'm going to now focus not only on this breathing, but relaxing my neck. Why would you want to do that? Because it re-engages your parasympathetic nervous system. When anxiety hits, you have the autonomic nervous system, and that's comprised of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. When your anxiety hits you out of nowhere, you're going to have an instant pump of cortisol and adrenaline. So you're in sympathetic mode at that point. The 3-second inhale and the 5 to 7-second exhale, along with focusing on what area of my body tends to be tense, re-engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. So you can cognitively and behaviorally go from fight or flight to rest and digest. And it only takes a few seconds when you really get good at it. And I would practice that even when nothing's going on. Set a timer on your watch or your phone. It goes off, you go, what the hell is this? Oh, that's my reminder to practice this little spur of the moment parasympathetic nervous system response. And so so you practice it when things are going fine. So that when something goes wrong, you've already practiced, you already know. So to you and all the other guys in here, you want to be parasympathetic dominant. Anxiety is a huge issue with ASD. All of you in here are sympathetic dominant. I'm always, every moment of every day, shooting to be parasympathetic dominant. In other words, at least 51% of the time I want to be in rest and digest, and only 49% fight or flight. Preferably more 80-20 rather than 51-49. And it's possible, but you have to practice.
Hey, this is Mark Hutton. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendly link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.